Hey YouTube, welcome back to the Blades to Be shop and what I think should be a pretty fun project. Going to be fun for me anyway. I get to do some things that I haven't done before or haven't done in a long time. Got a customer who has an older Buick car. I can't remember the model off the top of my head, so I'll drop a comment in here after because he'll remind me when he has a minute what model this is for. But he's got an older Buick that he can't get parts for anymore, and his rear struts are gone. So this is the original rear strut tube off of the car. Can't buy the parts for this anymore. But he came up with a modification where he's going to put a strut out of a Buick Regal, I believe is where he said he found these. So we're going to drop this strut inside the tube, and then we've got this threaded nut that's going to drop over that, thread that into the tube, and basically redo this strut model. So what we need to do is we need to get in here and thread the inside of these two tubes so that we can get this nut to thread in there to do that. So obviously this is going to stick out of the chuck a long ways, so we'll be doing this on the steady rest on this lathe to get those internal threads in there. I don't think I've used the steady rest on this lathe since I purchased it, so that's the part of the new part, be kind of fun. And also, since we're threading up to a blind shoulder, I'm going to go ahead and thread this away from the chuck, which is also something that I haven't done a lot. So I picked up a left-handed boring bar, and left-handed threading boring bar. So we're going to get in there and we're going to thread this away from the chuck, away from that blind stop that we have. And it's also metric thread, so I'm not going to be able to use the half nuts. So because this is a imperial lathe, once I engage the half nuts for that metric thread, I'm not going to be able to disengage those. Going to have to just go forward and reverse, back and forth to do that. So by threading away from the chuck, that's going to make it a lot easier for me to get into my start groove that will create, set my depth, and then just turn the lathe on and let it come out and cut the threads at that next depth. So that's what this project is going to look like. Because I haven't done this before, we're going to cut one practice thread in a piece of aluminum just to make sure that we've got the setup right, that everything is going to work, because this is the piece that he is not able to get anymore. So he's got two of these. I need to put threads in them. I really want to make sure that I get that right for him, because again, this is not a part that we can go find another one of to replace if I mess it up. So we'll do a practice in a piece of aluminum, make sure we've got a good setup, and then we'll knock out the two of these. So that's the gist of the project. Pulled up some threading information on this. You know, metric threads are nice. It's a 51 millimeter outside diameter. It's a 1.5 millimeter pitch, which means that the inside diameter is just going to be that thread size minus the pitch. So we're looking at 49.5. But I pulled up and I've got some minimum maximum specs on here, so I'll show you a better picture of this on the computer, and you can see what those dimensions are that we're going for.
Here is a look at that thread information in a little more detail. So I just went online, I pulled up a thread calculator. Looks like I got the Omni calculator here. So you put in your thread diameter, 51 millimeters, put in your thread pitch, 1.5, and it gives you all the specs you're gonna need on that thread. So we're focused on internal threads down here. So it lets me know that my minimum minor diameter has got to be 49.3, maximum 49.6. Basically right in the middle of that is the 49.5, which is 51 minus 1.5. I went ahead and put those into inches. It's pretty nice on the calculator. You can just change the units. So that lets me know that I'm going for a bore diameter of 1.944 to 1.956. Basically 1.950 is what I'm going to be shooting for to be right about that 49.5. So that lets me know where I need to bore the tube to, which is nice. Inside that tube, it's currently a little bit smaller. It's about 48.6, I think is what it is, somewhere roughly in there. So we've got room to bore that out to 49.5 millimeters before we cut our thread in there. So here's the details we'll be working from to get these set up and get this cut. Try this out on our piece of aluminum first. Get working on the tubes. All right, let's get back to it.
So that's it. I mean, it's really, we're just cutting threads in two pieces of pipe is essentially the project, but doing that with a steady rest, doing that internally, threading away from the chuck, so it should be some good, pretty good stuff, and like I say, fun project for me to go ahead and knock this out. Hey, if you're new to the channel, I encourage you to get out there and check out the other videos on machining, welding, knife making, just every other project coming through the Blades to Be shop. If you like what you see, hey, hit that subscribe button. Would love it if you drop a like, drop a comment on here, and come back and check out some other videos as we get more posted. All right, let's go ahead, jump into this. We'll get the piece of aluminum set up, and let's start cutting our practice thread, and then we'll get the steady rest set up. Let's get going. All right, so if you've been watching my channel, I made a Poly V pulley a while ago, this step pulley, and messed it up. I had a little issue with my DRO that had a chip stuck in it, so blew too deep in one spot. But anyway, there's still probably about an inch or so of depth in here. So I'm going to go ahead and drill this out to 49.5 millimeters, or drill and bore it out to 49.5, and this is what we'll cut that first practice thread in to make sure we're all set. All right, I got this nice 1 1/4 inch drill, so we're gonna knock out most of our size to get in there before we bore. So from a millimeter standpoint, this is roughly, so this is about 31, 32 millimeters, and we're going out to 49.5, so we'll still have plenty of room to bore after we get this drilled. Made pretty quick work of that. Yeah, I'm only 2.5 inches. I've got 3 inches of stick out, so we'll be able to make it all the way through with this one. So I'm going to try to use my DRO to set this up on 0, and I'm going to see if I can use my DRO and kind of get this boring bar on a 0 line and come out to where I'm boring at 49.5, and then use that 0 center line to set my depth of cuts on my thread to get that repeatability. So that's what I'm going to work on setting up right now. So I'm going to switch my DRO from inches to millimeters, and we'll take our first cut, we'll measure it, we'll see where we are, and then I'm going to go ahead and move my bar in and 0 it out on the center line. See how that's going to work for us. All right, 1.357. Let's see how many millimeters that is. So that's 34.467 millimeters. All right, so I'm going to wind my DRO into 34.467. I don't get a reading on the third one, so I'm going to wind that into there, 0 that back out, and then that should, if I go touch off again on my part, that should be at about 34.67. Now there's going to be flex from my boring bar, so it's not going to be a perfect read on that. But let's see how close it is when I take my next cut. All right, so I've got my DRO set to 37 millimeters is what I'm going to go for. Again, we're on our way to 49.5, so got a ways to go, but I just want to keep checking and, again, find out if this system with my DRO is going to work for me the way I want, so that I'll use that when I thread. So minus flex in the boring bar, this should measure somewhere pretty close to 37 millimeters. 457, 1.457, 1.457. Yeah, that's 37.0078. So I would say that is pretty close, and considering we were at the 7 is what I was getting on there when I set the DRO. I'd say we're not actually getting too much flex out of there, and that's getting just about exactly what I want. I've got a good 0 line set on my DRO. I can just come all the way out and machine this out to 49.5. I've got that tolerance. I can be anywhere from 49.38 millimeters all the way up to 49.68 to be in tolerance for this thread. So I'm trying to hit the 49.5, which is right in the middle of that. I should be able to just quickly rough this out, get out to that 49.5, and then we're going to be ready to thread. I'll get my boring bar or my threading bar set up. It'll be on the back side, but I'll get it set up on the 0 line as well, and then I can just move out and take my 5 passes that I got from my threading calculations and knock out the thread. Let's get this board out the rest of the way and get our threading tool set up on here. All right, I'm getting about 1.950 and a half, 9.950, somewhere right in there. All right, so on my tolerance sheet here, the 1.956 is my maximum, 1.944 is my minimum, so 950 should be right in the middle of that. Let's check it on the calculator here. 1.9505 inches in millimeters is 49.542. So again, I don't use metric as often, so let me just check. Is 0.042 millimeters is about 1.6 thou. So we're about 1.6 thou oversized. It's quite warm, so I'd say we are definitely well within our tolerance. That worked great, setting up my DRO on the middle like that. So we will definitely use that when I set up the threading tool on the back side. I'm going to go out here, I will touch off, and then I will wind it back out. Get that set up on 0, and then we will get in there and cut our thread. So I've only got 1 3/4 inch boring bar holder, so I'm going to pull out that right-handed boring bar I was just using to put in my threading tool.
And I just use a small plastic level across the flat spot on these boring bars to set them up and get them in the tool holder square. Quick check with the height gauge, make sure I am on center. Looking good, almost ready to thread.
All right, it's really hard to get a fishtail inside that piece in there to check how square I am on that tool bit. So I am just going to use the edge of my chuck and make sure that this bar is on here nice and square. I'm happy with that. All right, we'll get this beveled. We'll get my diameter set, and then we'll get the lathe set up for our metric thread pitch. Let's get this started first, and we're going to run everything in reverse now that we've got that left-handed bar in there. I'm going to set my depth, and let's get touched off on our edge and get our 0 line. Touched off, I'm going to wind it back 49.54, but I'm actually going to make sure I do it on the way in to get my backlash out. And I'm going to set that to 0, and I should come out here to 49.5, and that's where I should just touch off again. All right, 5.4, and I just touched. So I am set up, 49.54 is where I am just touching off on there. Again, I use an app called Machinist Pro from CNC Dirt. Got it set in millimeters. Thread calculator, 51 millimeter. Thread pitch, 1.5 millimeter. Choose a thread. I want internal thread. So here's where it says I can do that in 5 passes is what it recommends on here. So I can do 49.8, 50.2, 50.6, 50.9, and then 51 for that final pass. So now that I have my DRO set up where I'm reading these whole numbers, I could do that. You could also touch off and you could mathematically figure out the difference on all these and move those steps. But I figured if I set my DRO to 0, I'm going to be able to just move over these amounts and stay on track. I'll know when I'm hitting that 51 millimeter major diameter. So that's the plan. I'm going to do a backup. I'm also going to set the collar on my lathe. I'm going to flip it over to millimeters, and I'm going to 0 that right now so that I also know, or I'm going to set it to 49.5 millimeters and also know when I'm getting to 51. So I'm going to try to have my lathe manual collar as a backup to the DRO. So on here, if I just flip this over, right now it's on thousandths. I flip that around and I'm on millimeters. Let me get this back to where it should be, 49.54. Tell you what, I'm going to set this to 0. We're going to wind into where does 51 come out. I'm just going to put a Sharpie mark on there. So that's where I should be going, where my DRO reads 51. And I'm starting from 0 and that's coming back out repeatable. So we've got DRO set up. I've got a backup on this collar, and let's go ahead and get this lathe set up into our formulation, get that lead screw going the right speed for 1.5 millimeter pitch threads, set our depth, cut the groove back in there, and be ready to work on this thread. All right, so for a 1.5 millimeter pitch, I need to set this up into LCS6Y, LCS6Y. So I'm already in L, I'm already in C, I'm already in S, so I need to get into Y over here. Now I'm gonna have to grab the chuck a little bit and move that around. And down here I need to be in 6. All right, so let me get, actually, there we go. All right, we got that over there into Y. Sometimes you got to turn the chuck a little bit to get it. So L, C, S, 6, and Y, we should be set up to cut 1.5 millimeter pitch threads. Now again, with this one, for these half nuts, I can't engage and disengage like I could on a manual thread. So once I engage the half nuts, they are going to be engaged for the remainder of that. We'll be going forward and backwards in order to get lined up where we need to. Let's get our groove cut in there so that we've got a place to start the thread each time. And I'll use that as my 0 stop on my DRO once I figure out the depth I need to get in there. We'll knock this out. All right, so on this thread, I need to be pretty much minimum 18 millimeters deep. We're gonna go in there 20 millimeters, make sure that we've got plenty of depth. So I'm gonna go in there 20 millimeters right now, and I'm gonna cut a recess back in there out to that 51 millimeter diameter that we're gonna cut to. And I'm just gonna use my threading tool to go in there and cut a notch, move it back and forth a little bit from that 20 millimeter mark, and then I'll have a place to get in there and start the thread each time. Zeroed out for the front of the piece, go in there 20 millimeters. All right, I've got a groove in there. I've got a round spot where I can put my tool, set my depth where I know I'm not gonna run into my thread as long as I'm zeroed in the middle of that groove. So I went into 20 millimeters and I went 20.3 to 19.7. So I made that 0.6 millimeters wide in there. And this lathe starts up pretty quick. So I think even in steel, it's gonna give it enough to get it going to power through the beginning of that cut as it starts to move. So now let's engage the half nuts and get a sense of how fast this is gonna move for me to be able to stop in that 0 spot. See if I can get the DRO and the piece in here. I'm not gonna get both of those, but you'll be able to see it moving, get a sense of how far it moves on that. All right, can't do that. Just started it up the wrong direction. Everything is in reverse here, except for moving it where I need it to be. All right, that's not too crazy fast. Now, I am gonna run it forward because I need to get it in place. So that's how fast it's gonna be cutting that thread coming out of there, which is why we don't wanna be trying to stop in that little 0.6 millimeter wide groove. That's why we're threading in reverse. All right, I'm at 20.2 millimeters there. I've got as far as 20.3, so that gives a little bit of more ramp up time. Let's go ahead and set this first depth of cut, 49.815. All right, here goes that first thread pass. Half nuts are engaged. We're gonna run this in reverse. See how we do. There's our first pass. I'm gonna back that off. Feed that back in. And 50.239 is my next cut. In reverse, make sure we're going the right way. clear chip out of there now. Back that off. Next pass, 50.627 in reverse. Back it off. And 50.925. Go ahead and give a little bit of aluminum cutting oil there. And in reverse. And we're going to go for 51. We're going to go for full depth on this pass. And in reverse. Now, I probably have a little rolled up edge on there, we'll see. But let's just get a sense of how we're doing for size here. Starts in there, but it's a little snug. So we'll do a couple of spring passes before I really take anything extra. But again, I haven't used this tool bit before. It's probably got a little bit of a radius on it, so I'm not going to be surprised that I have to go a little bit deeper in order to get this to work. Because they look a little flat on top right now. That's why we're doing a test piece. All right, let's just do 51 again. And that scraped a little bit out of there. All right, we're going to go a little deeper, make up for the radius on the tool bit. Well, that is still pretty snug, so we're definitely going to go in there a little deeper. Now, I'm glad I did a practice because right now I'm just kind of pushing my tool bit when I'm setting that depth. I'm just shoving it into the aluminum before I start it up. For the steel, we're going to want to make sure we cut that groove just a little bit deeper to make sure that I've got the room to get in there what I need. All right, let's give it another shot. There we go. All right, I'm happy with that. We've got that all the way in there. Let's disengage our half nuts and we'll get in there and clean up that bore a little bit. Just retouch the bevel on the edge. All right, now we are truly in there to full depth. You know, I had taken and cleaned up this nut a little bit on the threads. Ideally, should you measure over wires? Sure, I don't have that capability for an inside bore, so I am cutting these threads to fit this nut, but I am happy with that fit. I think we can go repeat that on some steel now. So I just threaded that in there well past my Sharpie mark. We got to where we had about that much of a gap, so we've got it all the way in there on those threads. I think we're good. Let's go ahead and get our steady rest on here, get our first tube, and I think it's going to hold well enough in the 3-jaw. If I need to put the 4-jaw chuck on here, I will, but we're just holding outside of a piece of pipe, and I'm going to get to take a cut out of the inside of that piece of steel or that tube to clean it up. So I think the 3-jaw is going to hold it just fine. Let's go ahead and get our steady on here and get ready to go. right, I think I like that setup. I've got it running within about 6 thou down here on the outside of the tube. We're going to take a cut out of the inside. It's running within about 2 thou down there. So we've got it nice and square. I think I'm going to do everything on here at about 380 RPM. So I'm going to face a little bit off of the end here, square up that end. I think I need to take almost a 1/2 inch off of here, but do a little bit of quick measuring here to verify. But I'll square up this end. We'll get our boring bar on there and we'll get starting to make some cuts. I'll go ahead and set this back up for my boring in there, and we'll get it bored out to our diameter, and then we'll get it set up with our threading tool again. Well, this stuff is kind of tough. It doesn't seem to want to cut very well, so I'm actually going to slow my feed down and see what we can do here. All right, slowing the feed down I think helped a ton. Alright, so I'm at 9,495, 950 is what I'm going for. I'm going to call that close enough. I think I'm going to go ahead and just touch up this outer front leading edge. Make sure we've got clearance over those threads all the way in there. we got this prepped. We've got it ready. I've got my tool back on. It was actually within like almost a thou, just because of how I turned it on here, but you know, from where my DRO was from the last cut we made. So we're right on track. I need to get in there and bevel that, go in, cut our groove in there at the depth we want to go, and we're going to be ready to start cutting this thread. Stay tuned. All right, had a little lunch. Camera battery is charged. Let's get this thing knocked out. Bevel, cut our depth groove back in there, and we should be good. All right, our groove is set. We're locked in. I'm gonna engage the half nuts and let's get this thing knocked out. Go with the same 5 passes we did before. Use a little bit of Magic Tap cutting oil in there. .815, first pass. Going in reverse. Next, 50.239 in reverse. .627 and in reverse. So there's what it's looking like in there after that pass at 50.6. Looking good. 50.925 and in reverse. Pretty nice chip out of there that time. .05. Another nice chip it's pulling out of there. 51.1. All right, now it should at least be wanting to start in that thread. Yep, but it's going to get tight. All right, we seem to be tracking with our sample piece. All right, 51.15, and we'll start our spring passes. All right, run that a couple more times. All right, so it's just a little bit of wrench tight, but I've got that completely bottomed out in there. So I know it goes in all the way. It's a nice snug fit. I think that's good. I don't want to take any more out of there. Don't want to make it any looser than that. So let's get our cylinder in there and let's make sure that we face that back far enough and we can knock out the second one. All right, we know we've got a good fit. Let me disengage the half nuts. Let me just touch that front edge, make sure there's no burr. Run it through there at diameter, clean that up, and then we'll test our fit with the cylinder. There's a good look at a set of threads all done in there. Got that front leading edge all cleaned up. And you can see what it looks like back in there with that groove. Really happy with how those turned out. I think that worked great threading on that steady rest. There is the first one done. That is in there. There's no movement. It's got plenty of space to torque that up. Actually, I could leave a little bit longer on the tube on that next one. Can definitely leave a little bit extra on there, but it really doesn't matter. There just needs to be a gap to make sure that this flange does not touch and make contact. That's just free space inside that tube. It doesn't do anything in there, so there's no threads back about that far. But I can close up the gap a little bit more on that other one just to try to keep some more dust and whatnot out of there. But that's good. That's one complete. Let's get this out and get the other one set up. We're just about done. That's internal threading away from the chuck on a steady rest. I would say that worked out pretty well for us. All right, the second one's running even truer than the first one. Within about 3 thou, and we're taking cleanup cuts on the inside. So I think that's pretty awesome. All right, we got our depth set, so we know where that 49.5 millimeters are. We've got the beveled on the front. I'm gonna go back in there and cut that groove, and we'll be ready to cut the threads. All prepped for threading. You can see that groove that we've got back in there. Step at the front, just go back to that shoulder, plunge in, thread from the inside out. Working pretty well so far. Let's knock this one out. All right, half nuts are engaged. They will stay engaged until we have this done. First pass, 49.8. $50.23. Nice chip out of there, and 50.62. Yeah, pulling a beautiful chip out of there for that thread. 50.92. Just like last time, that was that 51.05. Again, as you get deeper on your thread, you start using more and more of that tool bit every time. Take smaller cuts. Alright, I think maybe one more spring pass, but we should be getting pretty close there. That's about what I thought. I think we got a pretty good formula, so let me just hit a couple more passes in there. We're ready to go. All right, we're in there flush. Last step, make sure our cylinder fits in there to depth. Alright, this one's bottomed out. That may be a little too close. You can just barely see the gap in there, but by the time that torques down, I don't want that hitting the cylinder, so I'm going to take another 25 thou off of there just to make sure there's no contact, and then we should be done. And there's number 2 done and complete. Well, YouTube, that's a wrap on another project here in the Blades to Be shop. I hope you enjoyed it as we got in here and we cut some metric threads on this PM 1440 TL lathe without having to change any change gears on the back. It's one of the nice things about this lathe is you can do metric or imperial threads without any change gears. We did our sample piece in some aluminum, really got a feel of this threading away from the chuck, tested out our tool, make sure we understood the depth we needed to go to, and then we got in there with these 2 tubes and set them up on a steady rest since we were pretty far out from the chuck, and got both of these bored out, threaded where they needed to, and hey, I think this is going to be a pretty good solution. So I know the customer said there's some other people that own this same kind of Buick, and not being able to get parts for it, they're pretty interested in understanding how to fix it. So hopefully for anybody else out there, it's a pretty quick trip, find a machinist, Find somebody that'll get in there and cut some internal threads for you. Hopefully keep your cars on the road a little bit longer if that's what you're shooting for. So as always, appreciate you watching. If you're new to the channel, I encourage you to get out there and check out the other videos on machining, welding, knife making, just everything else going on here in the Blades to Be shop. You like it, hit that subscribe button. Would love to hear from you. Drop a comment, drop a like on this video, and please tune in for the videos in the future. Hey, until next time, I hope you're out in your own shop working on some projects of your own, making some chips of your own. I'll be here in the Blades to Be shop working on the next project that's coming through the door. Hey, until that next video, y'all take care.